21 miles of water is all that stands between the global economy and a catastrophe most governments are not ready to admit is already happening. For 32 days, the Strait of Hormuz has been in crisis. 20% of the world's oil moves through that narrow channel, roughly 17 million barrels every single day. 3,000 vessels are stranded. Oil has climbed to $110 a barrel. The International Energy Agency called it the largest single supply disruption in the history of oil markets. Stagflation warnings are coming out of Frankfurt and Brussels. Humanitarian operations across East Africa are rationing fuel. And through all of it, one phrase kept appearing in briefings, in analyst reports, in quiet conversations between energy ministers. At least the Red Sea is still open. On March 28th, that changed. The Houthis of Yemen did not ease into this war. They announced themselves with a ballistic missile strike on southern Israel, air raid sirens in Beersheba, intercepts lighting up the night sky. Within 24 hours, they launched a second wave, cruise missiles and drones. Then their deputy information minister stepped in front of a camera and said what nobody in a European finance ministry wanted to hear. Closing the Bab al-Mandab Strait, he said, is among their options. That sentence needs to land before we go any further. Hormuz controls 20% of global oil. Bab al-Mandab controls 10 to 12% of seaborne oil and, this is the number that should frighten every supply chain manager on Earth, 25% of all container shipping. Not energy, everything. Electronics, medicine, food, clothing. Together, these two straits are the jugular veins of the global economy. Iran controls one. The Houthis, armed, funded, and strategically directed by Iran, sit on top of the other. This is not coincidence. This is architecture. To understand why the Houthi threat is credible, you need to understand who they actually are, because Western media spent years treating them as a ragtag militia and paid for that mistake in burning ships. The Houthis began as a religious and political movement in the mountains of northern Yemen in the 1990s. By 2014, they had seized the capital, Sana'a. By 2015, they were fighting a coalition led by Saudi Arabia with American logistical support. And they survived. A decade of bombing, blockade, and international isolation, and they not only survived, they grew more capable. They are now the de facto government of northern Yemen. Their coastline runs directly along the Bab al-Mandab Strait, and they possess anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, attack drones, and sea mines. They are not a gang. They are a military force with a navy. They are also the southernmost link in what Iran calls the axis of resistance. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and a network of armed militias across Iraq and Syria. Each operates with local autonomy. Each answers, ultimately, to Tehran. Their track record demands respect, even from people who despise what they stand for. From November 2023 to January 2025, during the Gaza War, the Houthis attacked more than 178 vessels in the Red Sea. They sank ships. They killed sailors. Red Sea commercial traffic collapsed by 70%. Shipping companies rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, 11,000 extra nautical miles, 10 extra days at sea, roughly $1 million in additional fuel per voyage. Goods worth an estimated $1 trillion were disrupted. Consumer prices across Europe rose. And all of that happened while the United States military was actively bombing Yemen. The Pentagon spent over $1 billion on strikes against Houthi infrastructure. The Houthis made zero concessions. They kept every weapon. They kept every commander. They outlasted the political will in Washington, and in February 2025, the Trump administration declared a ceasefire. The Houthis declared victory. Then they waited. The Houthi leader said it himself on March 5th, 3 weeks before they entered this war. Our fingers are on the trigger. That was not a metaphor. That was a countdown. Now those fingers have moved. The question is not whether the Houthis can threaten the Red Sea. History has already answered that. The question is what happens to the global economy if they choose to close it at the exact moment Hormuz is already shut, and whether there is any force, military or diplomatic, capable of stopping them before they do. That answer lives in Tehran, and Tehran has a plan. Iran's foreign minister says his country is prepared for at least 6 months of war. Donald Trump says this will be over in 2 to 3 weeks. Both cannot be right. And when you look at what Iran has actually put on the board in the last 32 days, the gap between those two timelines stops being a matter of opinion and starts being a matter of arithmetic. Let's do the arithmetic. On March 28th, Brigadier General Yahya Sari appeared on Al-Masirah TV, the Houthi state broadcaster, and announced what he called the first operation: ballistic missiles aimed at southern Israel. The announcement was calm, methodical, institutional. This was not a militia leader making threats from a basement. This was a military spokesman reading from prepared remarks in front of a logo, the way briefings are done when an organization expects to be doing this for a long time. The conditions the Houthis set that day were not vague. Their operations, they said, would continue until all aggression against resistance fronts ceases, not until a ceasefire in one location, not until one specific demand is met. All aggression, all fronts. That is an open-ended commitment with no defined endpoint, which means it is not a negotiating position. It is a declaration of indefinite war. Then came the second condition, the one that should have made every American naval commander's phone ring. If the United States uses the Red Sea to stage attacks on Iran, the Houthis will shut the Red Sea down. Completely. Iranian military officials confirmed the logic publicly. A new Bab al-Mandab front would open the moment Iranian territory is struck. The Houthi deputy minister confirmed joint coordination with Tehran, Beirut, and Baghdad. This is not a proxy acting independently. This is Iran pressing a button and watching its southern arm extend. Here is the geography that makes all of this terrifying in a way that missiles alone cannot capture. When the Strait of Hormuz closed, Saudi Arabia activated its emergency plan. The east-west pipeline, running across the width of the Arabian Peninsula, began pumping approximately 5 million barrels of oil per day westward to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea coast. That pipeline was Saudi Arabia's insurance policy, built precisely for a Hormuz crisis. It worked. For 32 days, it has been the only reason global oil markets have not fully collapsed. Traders know it. Ministers know it. The IMF knows it. Yanbu is within Houthi missile range. On any given day, around 30 tankers are sitting at anchor or loading at Yanbu. If the Houthis strike that port, not block the strait, just strike the port, 7 million barrels per day disappear from world markets on top of the Hormuz disruption. Saudi Arabia would then face a choice with no good answers. Re-enter a civil war in Yemen it spent years and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to exit, absorb the economic devastation of a collapsed oil revenue stream, or negotiate with a movement it has publicly vowed never to legitimize. Riyadh built the pipeline to escape one crisis. The Houthis have turned the pipeline's exit point into the next one. Pull back further and you can see all 4 moves at once. Move 1. Close Hormuz. 20% of global oil gone. Price moves from $70 to $110 a barrel. Move 2. The IRGC issues direct threats against American technology infrastructure, not cyber attacks, threats, putting every major U.S. corporation with Gulf operations on a war footing. Move 3. Attacks on desalination plants, power facilities, and oil terminals in Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. Not catastrophic, but relentless, designed to exhaust air defense systems and normalize the idea that Gulf infrastructure is not safe. Move 4. Activate the Houthis, open the threat of a second choke point, and force the United States to fight on two maritime fronts simultaneously. Iran cannot beat the American military in a direct engagement. That has never been the strategy. The strategy is cost, making the price of continuing this war so high in money and in political capital that Washington runs out of will before Tehran runs out of patience. That brings us to the aircraft carrier problem that almost nobody is talking about. The USS Gerald R. Ford is currently in Crete, undergoing repairs after sustained high operational tempo. The USS Harry S. Truman spent weeks in the Red Sea in early 2025 flying constant drone defense sorties, around the clock, day after day, burning through SM-2 interceptors and Patriot missiles at a rate that alarmed the Pentagon's own budget planners. Those interceptors cost over $1 million each. The Houthi drones they were shooting down cost under $2,000. The Pentagon is now quietly considering diverting Patriot stockpiles earmarked for Ukraine to cover the Gulf theater instead. That is not a footnote. That is a signal that American air defense inventory, built for one major theater, is being stretched across two. No administration publicly admits it is running low on missiles during a war, but the procurement orders, the diversion discussions, the repair schedules, these things leave tracks. Iran's foreign minister said 6 months. Trump said 2 to 3 weeks. 32 days in, one strait is closed, a second is under open threat, a Saudi port sits in a missile's range, and the U.S. Navy's most capable carrier is in a repair yard in the Mediterranean. The question is not whether Iran's strategy is working. The question is how much further it goes before someone decides the cost of continuing is higher than the cost of a deal, and whether that moment comes before or after the second choke point closes. $110 a barrel. That is the price of oil today, with one strait closed and one under threat. Every serious energy analyst on Earth is now running the same calculation. What happens if both close at the same time? And the numbers they are coming back with are not numbers the world has ever dealt with before. The answer is somewhere between $150 and $200 a barrel. Some projections go higher. Let that sit for a moment. Then let's talk about what it actually means. The two straits together carry roughly 30% of all seaborne oil. There is no alternative route capable of absorbing that volume. The pipelines that exist, Saudi Arabia's east-west line, the assumed pipeline running through Egypt, were built as supplements, not replacements. At maximum capacity, they cover a fraction of what the straits move. The rest has nowhere to go. Tankers rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope add 15 to 20 extra days per voyage, on top of the 11,000 extra nautical miles already being sailed to avoid the Red Sea. Port backlogs build, refinery schedules slip. The cascade moves faster than governments can respond. Gasoline in the United States is already averaging $4 nationally. In California, it is $6. A dual closure does not nudge those numbers. It breaks them. Fuel costs feed into everything downstream: plastics, fertilizer, food production, freight. The word economists use is transmission. The way an energy shock transmits itself through every layer of an economy until it shows up in the price of bread, the cost of a hospital visit, the monthly bill for heating a home. Car production lines that run on just-in-time logistics, no buffer stock, parts arriving hours before they are needed. Stop. Electronics shipments delayed by 3 weeks become a quarter's worth of missed revenue. Medicines with cold chain requirements, routed through Red Sea ports, face spoilage windows that humanitarian organizations are not equipped to manage. For wealthy economies, a dual closure is a severe recession. For developing ones, it is something closer to a breaking point. The European Central Bank has already warned that the Iran war alone, with only Hormuz in crisis, risks pushing major European economies into stagflation, Rising prices, contracting growth, the worst possible combination for a central bank because the tools for fighting inflation make growth worse and vice versa. A dual closure does not push Europe toward stagflation. It locks the door. For nations across sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and the Horn of Africa, countries that import the majority of their fuel and a significant share of their food, that hold limited foreign currency reserves, that cannot absorb a sustained price shock. The International Rescue Committee's current language is already breaking point. That phrase has a specific meaning in humanitarian operations, the point at which existing funding and logistics can no longer cover basic need. A dual closure pushes past it. Food import bills become unpayable. Fuel for water pumps runs out. The populations least responsible for this war absorb the heaviest cost of it. So is a dual closure actually possible, or is this a theoretical worst case that responsible analysts mention and then quietly set aside? It is possible. The triggers are specific, and several of them are already in motion. If the Trump administration orders strikes on Iranian power generation infrastructure before the diplomatic deadline, a scenario that has been reported and not denied, Iran has publicly committed to signaling the Houthis to escalate. If the United States or Israel strikes Houthi territory directly, the Houthis have stated they will respond by closing Bab al-Mandab. If no deal is reached and the war enters its third month, the probability of escalation rises with every week that passes simply because the incentive to hold back diminishes. None of these are remote scenarios. All of them are live. Cambridge researcher Elizabeth Kendall, one of the foremost Western experts on Yemen, called a dual blockade a nightmare scenario. Foreign policy described it as the outcome that could push oil prices beyond anything the modern global economy has experienced. These are not alarmists. These are people who have spent careers studying this region and are now using language they have never used before. Here is what stands between now and that outcome: a deal. Some form of agreement, not necessarily comprehensive, not necessarily permanent, that gives Iran a visible off-ramp without requiring the United States to formally capitulate. That deal has been elusive for 32 days. Iran says there are no negotiations. Trump says talks are going well. Both statements cannot reflect the same reality. The gap between those two positions is the most dangerous gap in the world right now. Not the 21 miles of Hormuz, not the 18 miles of Bab al-Mandab. The distance between what Washington believes is happening diplomatically and what Tehran is actually prepared to accept. Both straits are under simultaneous threat for the first time since this war began. That is not an accident of timing. It is the culmination of a strategy that was assembled piece by piece: Hormuz, then Gulf infrastructure, then American defense stockpiles, then the Houthis, designed to make the cost of this war outrun the political will to fight it. The strategy is working. The economic pressure on the United States and its allies is rising faster than the military pressure on Iran. Every week without a deal is a week the board tilts further. The world needed this war to be short. Instead, it is getting wider, more expensive, and more dangerous with each passing day. Watch the Red Sea coast of Yemen in the next 7 days. The next move in this war will not be announced from Tehran. It will arrive as a missile over the port of Yanbu or a drone above a tanker in the Bab al-Mandab. And by the time the world fully understands what it means, the calculation will already have changed.